Now I'm going to tell you a story, and no, it does not start with once upon a time. Now I'm going to share my story of my journey of living off-grid, which starts back in the early 90s. Now I know there's going to be a lot of people aren't going to be interested in this and they're going to click off, and that's fine, but I know there are going to be a few that are going to enjoy this and going to want to know my story. So let's see if we can smash this one out without holding you too long. So I started living off-grid with off-grid power dual battery systems back in around about 93, 94, when I used to travel around in an old four-wheel drive, and I put a dual battery system in and lived in. Now, the battery was an old lead acid deep cycle battery with the caps, and you had to fill up the electrolyte in it. And to charge it was a line going, a cable going from the starting battery to the auxiliary battery. And the way you charge that was an on-off switch, a big contact switch, clunk on, off, and that was how you charged your system. And my fridge, well, I couldn't afford a compressor fridge back then, so that was the old style, I'm not sure what they call them, where it was like a little heating and cooling pad, and that would cool down and keep your food cool. Used to use a lot of power, was pretty useless, but it did the job back then. So then we step forward and we then move on to where I bought a bus, and I lived in a bus full time and built the off-grid system in my bus. Now the batteries I used were GC2 golf cart batteries, 6-volt batteries, ran in series to 12 volt and parallel that up to double the capacity. They were 220 amp hour each, so I had 440 amp hour worth of batteries. Now the charge controller was an old 2-stage on-off charge controller that as soon as it reached to float voltage, it would turn itself off, and then as the voltage dropped, it would turn itself back on. That's the type of controllers we had back then, and that would have been the late 90s, early 2000s. Now, the inverter that I used, I'll show it to you. So coming into one of my buses, this is not my first bus, but I still have that inverter, and this is it here. It is a 3 kilowatt, 3000 watt modified sine wave inverter, and yes, it still works today, and that's what we used. We used modified sine wave inverters. Now we used modified sine wave inverters back then because, well, we could not afford to use pure sine wave inverters. They were just way too expensive. So I had the GC2 batteries with an old on-off 2-stage solar controller running a modified sine wave inverter, and that's what I used. And I used that for quite a few years, and I went through several groups of batteries, so my GC2s would last me around about 4 years, and I went through 2 lots of those batteries before I started to upgrade my system. Well, buy the house, my first house, and put an off-grid system in that house. Now that house, I put an off-grid system in, I changed to different batteries, which I'll show you, and then I changed to a different controller and a different inverter. So the controller that I used, I still have, because I can't let myself, now it's stuck, I can't give it away. Hang on a sec, got itself tangled up on the shelf here. So this, I just can't bring myself to get rid of. This was my solar controller that I used. So I went to a 3-stage PWM controller, the Plasmatronics PL60. Back in the day, they were a high-end controller. Now, I would have bought this, I think, around about 2000, 2001, and I paid back then over $700 for this controller. And that was a lot of money back then. And then for the batteries I used were the Rolls-Royce batteries. We're going to look at those in a second. And the inverter that I used is this inverter here, which is the Lutronix Pure Sine Wave 1800 watt inverter. Yes, and I still have that inverter running today. Now I paid, I think, around the $2,000 to $2,500 for that inverter, And that's what they were worth. They were worth a lot of money. Everything back then in relation to solar was very, very expensive. Now, the solar panels that I used, they're on the roof of that bus. They're still going. They're nearly 25 years old. And they are the 64 watt uni-solar panels. They cost $750 each. I bought 4 of them, so that is just on $3,000 for about 280 watts of solar. So yeah, very expensive. So let's have a look at the batteries that I put in. So these are the batteries that I put in. They're a Rolls-Royce L16 size, 6 volt, 600 amp hour at C100, 450 amp hour at C20. Now we're talking old terminology. We're not talking the C rate like lithium batteries. It was a little bit different back then, but that's going to be for another video if you want to know about the C rating. And these batteries, you can see them behind there, I bought 8 of those. I ran them in 2 banks of 24 volts, 4 in series, did that twice and then paralleled those together, so doubled my capacity. And I was running the 24 volt system, running that Lutronix inverter. And if you're wondering how big they are, well, there's the size of my hand and there's the size of the battery. So they are a pretty big battery. And yeah, I'm struggling to get rid of these too. Bit of nostalgic, sentimental value in these. So I ran those batteries for nearly 8 years. I got nearly 8 years out of those, but they were really struggling by the 8th year. Now, halfway through using those, I decided to get a bigger inverter and step up to 48 volts. So the inverter I bought was one of these inverters. I'm going to get the phone and point that to it because this is really, really heavy. So this is what I got when I converted over to 48 volt. So this is the old inverter that I put into service when I moved over to 48 volts. So it's the PIP style inverter, all in one 5 kilowatt inverter with its own solar controller in it. But I continued to use this solar controller because it was multi-voltage, so I just stepped this system up to 48 volts when I put this system in. And I ran those Rolls-Royce L16 size batteries with this inverter. Now, the solar panels that I put on when I upgraded that system and moved into my first house are the panels that I am still using today. They're the ones on the roof of this power shed here that have got those cracks through them because they're 15, 18, whatever years old, as well as those old 190 watt solar panels that you've seen in a lot of my videos that are dying, that don't produce as much power anymore, but they are 15, 16 odd years old. Well, I hope I'm not boring you too far because we're nearly at the end of my story, but I did mention that those Rolls-Royce batteries were dying and I needed to replace them. Well, I looked at lithium batteries as an option. But back then, lithiums were just starting to come out. So there were plenty of 12 volt lithium batteries coming out, but they couldn't be seriesed up to 48 volts because the BMSs weren't designed for 48 volt systems. Now, for the 48 volt lithium batteries were kind of coming on the market, but they were very, very expensive batteries. The dog is staring at me. You are not getting the ball thrown for you. No, I'm not playing with the ball. I'm trying to shoot a YouTube video. Distractions. Now, the 48 volt batteries that were available at the time were a brand, I think they were called Simplify. And by memory, I think they were around about 65, 75 amp hour at 48 volt. And those price ranges were around $8,000 to $10,000 per battery. So I certainly couldn't afford to chuck 10 grand at a 75, 65, 80 amp hour 48 volt lithium battery. It just wasn't available to me. It wasn't an option, put it that way. So I ended up buying a heap of, what size were they? I bought a heap of the N70 size AGM deep cycle batteries. Now I bought 8 of those. and I did a series parallel configuration to 48 volts, and that got me through another 4 years. 4 years of struggling because of the amount of batteries I had and the wiring configuration, and trying to keep everything balanced was a challenge. And for those that have followed me right through my other channels, you would have seen those batteries, and you know the struggles that I had with those batteries. So eventually when they died, I then had to bite the bullet and I had to get lithium batteries. But by then the lithium batteries were coming into play. There's a bit of a stage I forgot to mention, that while I was running my L16 flooded lead acid batteries, the big roll Surette, when I moved over to the 48 volt system, I ran that old PWM controller for a while, and then I upgraded to the Victron 150/85 controllers, which I still run today. And then when I moved over to the AGM batteries, after those L16s died, I upgraded to the Victron Multi-Plus inverter and took that green PIPS inverter out of service, which still works today, and I'm now using that Multi-Plus, which I am still using today. So that brings me up to now what I'm currently using as of now in 2025. So we've seen the power shed as it currently stands now. So the batteries that I now run are the 100 amp hour lithium batteries from Amptron. They have been a fantastic battery, no issues with them at all, and I'm running 3 of those to 300 amp hour at 48 volt, which is, well, 51.2 nominal, which is around just over 15 kilowatts. And I'm still using the 150/85 Victron controllers, and I'm still using the Multi-Plus inverter charger. Right, so we'll finish the video in here. Yeah, I know it's getting a little bit dark, so I'll try and get it done for you before we run out of light. So this is what I'm currently using now, and then what I've done is I've upgraded since then, and then I've brought in the Servo GX and started remote monitoring through the VRM portal. So that is where I am at this stage. So you can see that I've started out with an old deep cycle battery in the back of the four-wheel drive, and then moved up from the old on-off controllers to PWM controllers with modified sine wave inverters, and then as technology changed I moved up to MPPT controllers and pure sine wave inverters, and we've gone from lead batteries to lithium batteries, and now going into electronic monitoring. So it's certainly been a journey of technologies and changes in technologies through the decades that I've been playing around and living with off-grid power. And it makes me wonder what we're going to see in the future coming up as technologies grow and new styles and things get invented. So that is my story of living off-grid from the early 90s up till now, and having a look at some of the technologies that we used back in the day. I don't know how many people have followed me right to the end of this story. If you have, leave a comment below, so at least I know someone's watched it right through the end. I hope you liked my story, and we'll see you in the next video here in the Off Grid Homestead.